Want to come on up and ask some questions?
I can start you off. I have a question.
All right, thanks, Andreas.
So thank you very much. And from all the work that you're doing, both of them kind of overlap in terms of digital, the apps, and so we have a lot of undergrads over here. And a lot of times we ask them, what do you want to do? And they're kind of like, I don't know. So from your own perspective and from your own work that you're doing, what should they do in terms of getting involved more in the digital aspect of exercise science? What do they need to do things that you do and change and push those changes through this new world of exercise? Because it's not just counting reps and sets. There's so much more that they can do. So what would you advise them?
Well, I think it's kind of an interesting case, is that you got to think is that technology is always evolving. So it's kind of like you always got to be mindful of when when the companies come out with their devices. So following the trends of think Apple is like the new iPhone comes out every September, for instance. So probably there's a new watch going to come around. So knowing the trends of when that comes out, but then you'll know is that some technologies are going to take longer than others. So it's just, it's a balancing beam, but then also figuring out is who's it meant for? Because some, technology's got its own behavior. So some people might not want a device. So you just have to work around those type of situations.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. Just more understanding the technological space. I mean, the younger generation knows a lot more of what's upcoming as far as the technological side of it that can be utilized in practice. So, and really, kind of going back to what I was saying, this more personalized approach. We read in textbooks, like Andres, you said, 3 sets of 10 to 12 to get an increase in hypertrophy. Well, some people may do that all the time and not get hypertrophy, but if we could find ways to use the technologies that we have to understand more of a personalized approach, so we could go to more personalized recommendations for that individual, so to help them get the performance benefits or the overall health benefits. I think that's kind of that space, is using what's there and taking it to the individual is the key.
Hi, Heidi Skolnick. So my question's about the glucose monitoring for healthy individuals. And you spoke to many people don't know how to interpret it, but how do you interpret it? Because having spikes when you're healthy is okay, and it comes back down, and you don't need to do anything about that. And so we have such a carb-phobic environment, and people who do like that continuous feedback but don't really know how to interpret or use it, in fact, misinterpret it. So how valid do you know that it is for people who have no issues with diabetes, type 1 or 2, to actually be using that?
Well, I could speak from the diabetic. Well, and that's where it's funny, is that, I'm trying to avoid the type 1 diabetic bias, because a lot of them are like, the diabetes space does not like it. So they're against the notion of healthy people using these devices, because it's like, well, I need this device. Why do they need it? But then the other catch I can argue is that, some of these CGMs that are on the market, you need an MD to sign off to get them. So, it's just trying to find the right device, and then, everyone's going to be interpreting them differently. But then explaining to someone hey, it's okay if your blood sugar goes up because you ate or something other. But then you'll have to also explain is for instance, stress. Stress will drive your, blood sugar up. So there's a lot of education and counseling for someone if they want to use these devices, what to expect.
And what about its use for athletes during exercise, since it's not really insulin dependent? Anyway, do you think that there's a great use during activity to know when they should feed? Or?
It's a big cheating mechanism. The professional cycling teams in Europe have actually, you're disqualified if you use them. Because because of the trend arrows, like I've displayed, is that you can know, hey, I need a fuel at this time. So, it's kind of this cheating of performance, per se. It's like a legal format, but then it's also how many people, it's going back to the talk earlier, is that, you have a person that's doing a 2-hour marathon. Do they really need that data?
Right.
But then I could argue is that, when I'm looking at this data, say, for instance, on, a half marathon, your glycogen stores are not depleted at a half marathon. So why do I need a gel at mile 5? So it's like those kind of education components that we need to address to like public eye of like, well, if you're going to use this, here's what you got to consider and why is it important.
I know, I'm just going to add, that's just amazing to me that it would be illegal, though, and that it's something that's accessible to everyone. It doesn't put you at risk like doping, like to give you an advantage, right? It would be a healthy advantage not to bonk. So that's amazing that's considered illegal to use it.
Yep.
Yeah, I got one for both of you. So Ben, do you know if there's any device in the market that uses glucagon as well as insulin? Because you mentioned like the spikes with exercise, and you may be able to incorporate that so you don't have to wait to exercise. Or
Right. So there is glucagon shots available that endocrinologists prescribe for diabetic patients. Diabetes patients. But usually it's just going to be also dependent, like, do they have a history of passing out? Like, that's when it's really like, hey, you need to prescribe these for someone because, like right now I had, knock on wood, I hadn't had an episode, but other people, you need to monitor that of when they might need a, shot of glucagon if needed.
so they exist, just not in a wearable technology.
Not right now, not for glucagon.
Yeah. Okay. And my other question was, you showed a lot of research. I wasn't sure if there was one that looked at more of a subjective measure of work rather than an objective measure. So you have the same weight and the one I was referring to is 70 kilos, I think it was, and they were doing the same amount of work, but one's maybe they have more experience, or they're different populations, so their heart rate is lower, so their actual work, maybe they're more efficient. Do you have one where they're doing the same amount of like quantifiable work rather than, I'm not quantifiable, I'm sorry, like personable?
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing that goes into the GX app is actually exercise intensity.
Yeah.
Just kind of that scale of like 6 to 20 for taking from RPE standpoint. That can be utilized as well because that goes into the idea of someone's overall fitness as well. That kind of goes into your question. Yep, 70 kilogram person exercising the same thing, intensity, relative intensity, but it could be harder depending on their heat acclimation. So there's a lot of different factors that are involved. But yes, of course, exercise intensity is a critical component of that in someone's personal, like what they feel as far as intensity. It's crucial to understand that response.
Right. Thank you.
Hi. So I know you had mentioned that you can lose like several substances through your sweat. And I had heard of like several programs in which the objective is to excessively sweat, like being in a room where the temperature is higher or wearing certain wraps that make you sweat more. I was curious on your opinion on whether those are beneficial or not.
Yeah, I think in some instances those could be as far as like beneficial to like a weight loss standpoint. So if someone is using it to say like a wrestler losing it to lose weight, that's a great way to lose sweat by putting on more material to help you lose that. But as far as like an acute standpoint for performance, those aren't ideal. And in fact, like in a wrestling sense, there's a rehydration phase to make sure they go back up in weight. So if your idea is to lose weight acutely, those can be utilized. But as far as a performance standpoint, if you're losing greater than 2%, you're not going to perform at the best of your ability. So as far as that sense, I would not say recommend it. But if your goal is just to lose weight and then rehydrate back, that's fine. But probably not the best thing for performance if too much.
Okay, so for health, it's like it would negatively impact you, you'd say? Because I know for weight loss, like it could be beneficial. But if would you lose too much of a certain substance or?
But yeah, I think the idea when I say the weight loss, I mean that acute sense but like for someone's overall weight loss, kind of like how Dr. Shakisik was talking about before. This is not the method to use. Focusing something on losing fat mass is the way for that. That acute sense of losing body fluids, as I mentioned before, it could affect your nervous system. It could affect the ability of nutrients to flow throughout the body. if you lose enough plasma volume, your heart rate is going to work harder. It's going to work much harder, so there could be cardiovascular bad things that occur, excuse me. So I would say, when I say weight loss, I mean that acute sense, not the chronically.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
How's it going? I have a question for Dr. Hinckley. So some people like sweat more in different areas than others, as you were talking about earlier with the variability. If you know where you sweat from more, like is that where you would place the patch, or is it always on the arm no matter what?
Yeah, so for the GX patch, it's actually right for that forearm. So we've made sure that's only for the left forearm, and it seems like if we compare like side to side, there's no difference from using right, but that's why we say suggesting using left. But again, it's a practical aspect as well. So putting a GX patch on like your forehead may not be best to do, or putting it on your back, even though you're a higher sweater there. Practicality is not the best for that. That's why we have it on the forearm. And like I said, we've done the work to show that the whole body sweat response is highly correlated to that forearm site.
Gotcha. And one more question. When measuring, like, would you guys use the patch for, like, as we were talking about earlier with the weight cuts, like, how accurate is that as compared to just weighing yourself after, like, a long workout?
As far as the sweat patch for the, like, just a way in and way out?
Like, if I were to just do, like, with a wrestling workout, you probably lose, like, 5 pounds of just, fluid just because of the workout.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would just measure before and after. How much more accurate is the patch than just measuring your body weight before and after?
Yeah, so I think kind of that idea is as accurate to look at sweat rate for that. But remember, when we're looking at sweat rate, it's not just the amount that we're losing, which we're getting with the whole body approach. It's what we're losing as well. So if you have 2 wrestlers that lose 5 pounds, one person may just lose a lot more fluid than sodium, but then someone else may lose the same amount of fluid but a lot more sodium. They're going to have a lot more physiological strain because of that loss of sodium. So that's why weighing in and out is good. It's one step, but now taking the aspect of what is in that sweat is even further to help bring back to, if someone losing weight in that acute sense, what they need to put back into their body to perform at their best ability.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question that maybe both of you can answer. Obviously, health is very individualistic, but sports is, a mix of individual and team aspects. So how do you think an integration of the sweat technology across, teams, and integration to practice plans, to looking at overall team health as opposed to, because I was thinking, especially talking about, different diabetic technologies and stuff, there's a lot of onus and stress on that athlete and everything. So, would it be that every 30 minutes at practice, everyone has their patches on, taking pictures and everything? How do you, apply that to an overall team?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So there's actually 2 GX apps. There's the GX app that's for the individual. There's also a GX team app. So say the athletic training coach can have that, the practitioner can have that. So he or she could be out there taking pictures of the sweat patch to understand each of those team members and then look at their individual hydration needs in the concept of the whole team. So I think that's the way our team has kind of helped that aspect of not just from an individual, but helping now the practitioner to help their entire team by understanding each individual's need.
Hi, I'm Lizette from Mercer University. I had a question about your studies, and if in your findings you found a difference in female athletes versus male athletes, just because we're dealing with estrogen and how that affects the endocrine system, and what's that doing? Is that a hindrance because we have that factor?
Yeah. So actually, one of the things in GX apps to conclude is biological sex. Mm-hmm. So it could understand, because there is differences with men and women mm-hmm. as far as the sweat response. So definitely with something like a new wearable technology to understand sweat, you have to understand who that person is as well. So yeah, but is there more research that's needed in this area? Absolutely. I think if we think of the whole realm of exercise science, there is an underrepresentation of women as understanding the mechanisms behind how they perform in their molecular needs. I think there's more in that area that we need to do to kind of solidify the woman's response to exercise.
Yeah, I'm curious because over time, as a female ages, of course, that sweat is a factor. right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I guess I'm next. I'm Dr. Farrell from Nassau University Med Center. I just had a question for you, Matt, correct, right? About the Gatorade study. So I noticed when you guys did the 11 different points or a particular point, the fractional excretion of sodium, if you will, or fluid loss seemed to be much higher just on the graph. Maybe I misinterpreted the graph from all the way back there, but when you incorporated the whole body image, I was wondering, it seemed that the fractional excretion and the fluid loss seemed to be less when you did the whole body picture, just from my interpretation of the graph. And I was wondering, is that because the whole body also included apican sweat glands, such as the axilla and the groin, which is a much different composition, you know, less electrolytes, more lipids, that sort of thing. And I was wondering if that maybe was incorporated in the whole body, but not the patches.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, you're right. It's, you know, the whole body approach, you're not only just looking at the exocrine gland, but you're all looking at, you know, all the different types of sweat glands throughout the body. So yes, that's definitely one of the reasons for that. But another reason too is when we think of like the sweat patch, it is creating a different microenvironment under that patch in comparison to just being out in the open air. So there could be differences with that microenvironment that leads to those changes in electrolyte concentrations in the sweat. But yeah, good pickup.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And just a side question, my own curiosity, it's the patch especially, we looked it up, it's like $7 a patch, it's fairly affordable. That's a one-time use, I imagine?
Yep, that's a one-time use.
Okay, and is there any like plan to integrate this into, because it's Gatorade, you know, and Gatorade has a far reach, maybe to try to integrate it into some sort of combat sports setting where weight cuts and the loss of fluid is very prevalent and kind of dictates fights in a lot of situations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good point. As of right now, there's no talk of that, but it could very well be someone to look into with like their own, you know, combat sport team to see how the sweat response is in the sodium concentration, in this case, chloride concentrations. In fact, but yeah, that's a good idea to move forward with it.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much, guys.
Hi, Dr. Bordeaux. In terms of CMGs, are they controlling their blood sugar better compared to finger stick? Are they in the hospital less?
The data do suggest that continuous glucose monitors do actually provide better patient adherence and better quality of life. Like there's so much, like there's data out there.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I actually have a question for both of you. So we did a study a few years ago where what we found was that the amount of change in glucose during exercise was associated with improved performance on mental tasks, so on cognitive tasks. So using CGMs, but also same thing with like supplementing with carbohydrate-rich beverages and such, could a team get an advantage? So now we're not talking cyclists, right? We're talking team sports that don't last that long. And we know how long it takes carbohydrates to kick in. So is that a possibility that you think in a team sports setting to use CGMs to be able to supplement carbohydrates during a game or whatever to improve that performance?
Look up Team Novordisk. That's actually a team of type 1 professional cyclists. And there's a documentary called Ride for Your Life. So if you want to know what, you know, as a professional cyclist, what's it like for cycling, that's one area. Another one is Beyond, Bike Beyond. So this is just general public. So you can see from another angle. And then later this year, hopefully, is that I have a colleague that, because I was in the New York City Marathon, we have another document that I'll be in for, you know, you get to see from another angle. So there's many different avenues, but I do think from a professional team, they would definitely have an upper end.
Then how could they do it? Considering how long it takes for glucose, you know, to absorb and everything, how could that? And then I know Matt we've actually had this conversation a little bit.
I think it's going to depend on what the exercise is. Like, what is it, a, you know, prolonged endurance activity? Is it power lifters? Or, you know, everyone's going to be different. So I think just knowing, and then how, you know, how long are they diagnosed with it? Or, like, you know, it's introducing a whole nother angle to things. So I think it's just knowing what human response is right away is the most key thing.
Yeah, and kind of going to the idea of the carbohydrate utilization in a team sport, if we think of something like soccer, where you have spurts of high intensity exercise and sprinting to the ball, over time, that's going to increase carbohydrate utilization. So over time, those stores are going to go down. So we're getting to a stage where many athletes could potentially bonk at the end. So this could lead to maybe more what they're doing before. How long what are they eating in the hours preceding their match to help out, and then what they're eating during like halftime as well, like even if it's just a little bit, to have that fuel that's into the system that can help them fuel activity.
Thank you, both of you. Oh, sorry.
All right, so I actually have this question for Dr. Matt. So how does the GX patch work with athletes who swim? Because I know from personal experience that it's very hard to tell how much you've been sweating over the course of a practice or even a meet. And I just want to know how would it work for these athletes, and would the potential of knowing also increase the performance of these athletes? Because I also want to know how this 2% hydration loss affects them. Affects them and their performance in terms of their peak performance and what they can do.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and my simple answer is we don't know. We haven't done this with swimmers. The app does have a tendency to fall off, particularly with kind of talk about the combat. So like if there's a lot of interaction between individuals, the patch can fall off. We have not tested it in the realm of swimming as well, so I can't give you a good answer for that right now. But yeah, as far as like the changes in body mass, that could just be a nude body mass before and after, and then you could get those hydration needs as far as that realm, not necessarily the electrolyte concentrations, but that would be the best realm to see how much someone loses during a swimming meet or just an individual event.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much.
All right, so if we don't have any more questions, it is time for poster competition and lunch. So